About 10 years ago, Rabbi Iderson and I made a change to our Bet Mitzvah program. I was dissatisfied with the requirement that all our students fulfill a mitzvah project in the lead up to their service and celebration. Too many of them, it seemed, were equating mitzvah with volunteering. And of course, volunteering your time to a project that benefits others is a mitzvah. But it's just one kind of mitzvah. Mitzvah is so much bigger than that. There are ritual mitzvot like lighting Shabbat candles, holding a Passover Seder, and saying blessings to express gratitude for the everyday things in our lives. And there are mitzvot that we perform to respond to the needs of others. Acts of kindness, supporting someone while they recover from illness, providing comfort to someone, being welcoming and inclusive to someone so they're not sitting alone. All of these mitzvot create connections. Connections between ourselves and something that is beyond us, whether it's God or other people. And so we instituted the 10 Mitzvot Project, inspired by a rabbinic teaching from the Mishnah that lists 10 mitzvot that are beyond measure, ones that we're meant to try and do just as often as we can. And what I love about listening to students as they share some of the things that they've done to fulfill these mitzvot are the times that they almost seem to write off some of what they did as seeming just so insignificant. So often they associate the significance of the mitzvah with the amount of effort they put into it. But that's not always how mitzvot work. When a student who doesn't have a lot of friends is sitting alone at a lunch table and is just miserable being at school, the simple act of smiling and inviting them to come and sit with you, introducing them to some of your friends, can have a far greater impact on the life of another person than most 12-year-olds really imagine. And when I share this with a student, I see them smile. It's a reminder that it doesn't always take a lot to give of ourselves to others, and the happiness that it can generate, not only for the one that we assist, but within ourselves is, in my opinion, what life is truly about. Connection. The word actually lies at the heart of the root of the word mitzvah. I want to tell you another story about connection. It was shared just a few weeks ago on the Facebook page of Jewish Families of Greater Boston. And I contacted the woman who posted it, and I got permission from the author to share the story with you today. Her friend had written, "My name is Aura, and I'm a sophomore. When I was a senior in high school, I went on a trip with my grade to Israel for a month. The trip was organized through a program called Ramah Israel, and we had 5 Israeli counselors who came with us everywhere we went and lived in the same hostels and kibbutzim as us throughout the trip. One of those counselors was Hirsch Goldberg Polin. I want to tell you a bit about Hirsch. First, I just want to start by saying that Hirsch was a very energetic, funny person, and he brought light and laughter to every room he walked into. There's one story in particular that I want to share. One day we were in Eilat, and we had to wake up at 5:30 a.m. to try and avoid the heat because it was extremely hot, and we were going on a hike, and we didn't eat anything before we went. I started off the hike with my friends, and it was a very difficult hike because we were climbing a steep mountain, and it was in the 90s. And after a while, me and one of my friends were both feeling nauseous, and a little while later, I'd gotten separated from my friend. And I reached a point where there was a very steep decline and the rocks were slippery, and I fell. A few minutes later, Hirsch saw me, and he could tell by the look on my face that I was having a very difficult time. And he asked me if I was okay. I told him what had happened, and he told me it's going to be okay. And we were almost there because at that point we could see the end of the path. And he really pushed me to keep going and helped me to turn a negative experience into a positive one. Aura goes on to express her devastation at learning that Hirsch had been kidnapped on October 7th. She writes, "Sometime after I found out that Hirsch had lost his arm, because he was throwing a grenade out of a bomb shelter that he and other people were hiding in to try and protect the other hostages from getting hurt before they'd even been kidnapped. It just goes to show how selfless he was and how he always put others before himself. Ora and others who had been on that high school trip wrote notes to Hirsch's parents when one of them was going to be going to Israel and could hand deliver them. And Ora describes the pain of learning that Hirsch was one of the 6 hostages who had been found shot dead in a tunnel under Gaza on September 1st of this year. She expresses gratitude for the friends who surrounded her and brought her comfort. And then she brings her reflections to a close and she writes, "Knowing Hirsch, I know that what he would want would be for us as a Jewish community to keep pushing through. And even when people try to knock us down time after time, we need to just get right back up and live our lives to their fullest potential. I also think we can carry on his legacy by being happy and celebrating life through listening to music and dancing in his memory, because that was something that he loved, and he's no longer with us to dance himself, but we can all dance with him in mind." Now, I don't know if Ora knew this, but being happy and living a meaningful life was something that I think Hirsch Goldberg Polin had been thinking about quite a bit before that fateful day that he was kidnapped at the Nova Festival. This past summer, at a gathering in Jerusalem, his mother, Rachel, mentioned that Hirsch had been partway through reading The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. He told them that he was going to leave the book at their home, given that he was expecting to only be gone a couple of days, and he'd pick it up when he returned. And she mentioned that he'd gotten as far as chapter 6. When I learned about this from a colleague just a few weeks ago, I immediately went online. I ordered the book, and it arrived the next day, and I opened it immediately, and I looked at the table of contents to find chapter 6. And it took my breath away. The first 4 chapters of the book focus on the purpose of life and the ways in which the Dalai Lama defines and talks about happiness as core to that purpose. And part 2 of the book is labeled Human Warmth and Compassion. Chapter 6 focuses on deepening our connections to each other and the centrality of developing that as a lifelong practice. In other words, what I regard to be the inner meaning of mitzvah. And chapter 7 is on the value and benefits of compassion, a key ingredient that enables us to form connection, not only with those who seem the most like us, but also with others with whom we share a family, a congregation, a town. And like Ora, I am inspired to speak this morning in memory of Hirsch Goldberg Polin and to share some of what he had been studying and thinking about, because it's so core to how we also define a meaningful life in Judaism, and with respect to connection and compassion, lies at the heart of living a life of mitzvah. One of the things I also often point out during those Saturday morning services co-led by one of our 13-year-old students is that bar, bat, or bet mitzvah is not an event that takes place on a single day. It's a stage of life, and it begins the day that we turn 13. So every single one of you in this room who is Jewish and age 13 or over is a bet mitzvah, irrespective of whether or not you ever helped to lead a Shabbat morning service, read or taught Torah when you turned 13, or at some point after. So what does it actually mean? Once age 13 or older, each of us is now personally responsible for how we live a life of mitzvah, a life of connection, of responsiveness to each other's needs. And to the extent that we feel able, in the specific circumstances or context, we do our best to live this way, even with people that we might not like very much. The Dalai Lama also teaches this. In fact, Buddhism offers a meditation practice called metta, or loving kindness, that invites us to begin with ourselves and then our most beloved, and only then to meditate on those that perhaps we don't know so well, we're kind of neutral towards, and then eventually to the ones that we positively dislike, that in the language of metta meditation they call the enemy, and to see if we can find a way through this practice to extend compassion toward all. We brought this practice into our reflective Kol Nidre service last night, and I shared then about some of the deeply profound aha moments that I have had with respect to some of the relationships in my own life through this meditation practice of metta. Practicing compassion isn't about giving people a free pass. It's about envisioning a different, more loving way of being in connection with others so that the choices that we are making in our day-to-day interactions are guided as much as possible by the positive ways that we can model a way of being and we'd want most to encounter in others. Because the alternative to that is just the transference of all of us, one to the other, of our frustrations and our hurts and our anger. Sometimes others who were never the cause of those hurts in the first place. We see so much of that in our world, each and every day. How can we be the antidote to what we see and experience? Sue Johnson, a leading couples therapist, put it in her book, Hold Me Tight. Most couple fights are really protests over emotional disconnection. Underneath all the distress, partners are asking each other, can I count on you, depend on you? Are you there for me? Do I matter to you? The anger, the criticism, the demands are really cries to their lovers, calls to stir their hearts, to draw their mates back in emotionally and reestablish a sense of safe connection. We all need connection and compassion, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Dr. Emma Sapala is a best-selling author, and she teaches at the Yale School of Management's Women's Leadership Program. She's a psychologist and research scientist by training, and her expertise is, and I love this subject, the science of happiness. She offers us top 10 benefits of living a more compassionate and, by extension, a more connected life. And you can get into the weeds in an edited collection she put together, the Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science. Here's the rundown of the top 10. 1, it makes us happy. A brain imaging study by the National Institute of Health shows that the brain pleasure centers are as activated when we see money going to charity as when it is given to us. Studies also show that we are happier when giving things to others than when we buy things for ourselves. 3, it makes us attractive. A study on dating preferences showed that people, irrespective of gender, rated kindness as the most important character trait. 4, it uplifts everyone around us. 5, it spreads like wildfire, showing generosity and kindness creates a kind of chain reaction in others. 6, it might boost health. There are several studies that show that people who help others and have a positive connection to others are, on aggregate, healthier and more resistant to illness. 7, it gets us out of a funk. Helping others when we're feeling blue can help pull us out of our sorrow by turning our focus on others, which helps us to gain perspective. 8, it's a very natural thing. Studies have demonstrated that both infants and adults are automatically tuned towards wanting to be helpful. 9, it gives us more time. Ironically, spending time volunteering gives us a feeling of abundance in our lives, of time as well as money. And 10, it's good for the environment. Kindness ripples out beyond ourselves to our society, our community, and to the larger world. Now, if you're paying attention to the words in those big, hefty prayer books, you'll notice that at the High Holy Day season, and on Yom Kippur in particular, we are reminded, we are urged in the words of those prayers over and over again to recommit ourselves to a life of mitzvah, striving to bring more compassion and more connection into our lives. When we pound our chests and recite the list of al chayts, so many of those are sins to do with the way that we treat others, the way we spoke to others, the ways that we made choices that reduced compassion and connection in our world. When we recite the 13 attributes of God throughout the day at each service, we sing, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. The opening words has us appealing to a God that is compassionate and gracious. How do we experience more rachamim, compassion, and chen, grace in our lives, if not by being the ones made in God's image to manifest those attributes through the way that we live? And this afternoon we'll hear the book of Jonah read by our teens. At this point in the day, perhaps a little lightheaded and punch-drunk from the fasting, we're offered a story that in its cartoon-like caricature shows us how everyone in the story responds to God's message and does teshuvah, finding their way back to compassion and connection, except Jonah. He cares more that a plant that was providing him with some shade dies than a whole community repented and was saved from destruction. Also this afternoon, we hear excerpts from Kedoshim, the Holiness Code, which concludes, do not do unto others as you would not have them do to you. If we want to live in a world where there is more compassion and connection, a community or a congregation or a household where we experience more compassion and connection, then we must do unto others as we would wish that they do unto us. Yes, there are people in the world who are willing to do terrible, evil things. We must not be naive, and there are times when we have to fight back to defend a greater good. We can have compassion and still demand justice. But we must do all that we can to counteract the tendency to hate back, to dehumanize others, and to use difference as an excuse to disconnect. Those things will just make our world darker and smaller and poison our souls. Hirsch Goldberg Polin died at the hands of Hamas evildoers. But he dreamt of a better world filled with compassion and connection and happiness. He believed in pursuing peace. We must not give up on that vision. So let us commit to doing our part, to do what we can to bring a little bit more of his dream into this world. May we all find our way to living with a little more compassion and connection in our lives this coming year. Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Ken Yehi Ratzon.